Welcome to the Be Gritty podcast, where sports psychology meets business strategy for entrepreneurs. I'm your host, Coach Holly. Now let's be gritty. Hey everybody, welcome to the Be Gritty podcast today. I'm excited to have Ken Kasterko, founder of Endurance Leadership, on my podcast today to chat about how to correctly measure success. Welcome, Ken. I'm so glad you're here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Holly. I'm excited.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun day. But before we get into this topic, which I'm very excited to chat about, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and what you do, who you are, all the things?
Well, I wouldn't call myself actually a coach. I call myself more of an advisor because I do coaching, consulting, you name it, listening. I guess that's what we do a lot, right? As coaches, we listen, and consultants who should listen. But so I started a company called Endurance Leadership, probably just right before the pandemic happened, and had aspirations of doing a podcast and coaching. I was going to coach one-on-one. And throughout the last couple of years, it's morphed into, I have a podcast called Who Do You Think You Are? And that's been just a joy to do. And then I haven't been actually, really marketing my coaching as much as I have been just helping the people that come in my path. And that's been something I've been doing along with the podcast. And then I've been in the operations segment of, my career has been in operations. I always say I'm a recovering operations manager, VP, whatever. I've been in operations for about 20 years. So that's where I got my chops in coaching, was
awesome.
Coaching people in the business corporate sector. So yeah.
Awesome. I love it. And you are also an ultra runner, right?
I am. Yes.
Yes.
One of the crazy people. Yeah.
One of the crazy ones. See, I'm just a marathoner. I don't think I'm crazy. I think ultra runners are crazy, but I love them. A lot of my friends are ultra runners, but I don't know how you guys do that. I think, honestly, my gut would not even allow me to do these ultras where you're shoving down all this weird random food. No, thanks. But I love supporting all of you that do it.
Well, thank you, because that's one thing I think with ultra running is you don't do it alone.
Yeah.
And there's only a very few. I don't even know if even the top elite people do it alone. They got teams and stuff. So it is something, especially for the novice people like me who aren't anywhere near ultra elite.
Right.
We need tons of people to help us.
Yeah, the whole crew. I love that they call it a crew. It's very much needed for sure. So let's dive into this. Offline, we were talking a little bit, and you had talked about this topic of correctly measuring success and what does that look like? Why don't you kind of intro us into that and what you want to chat about today?
Sure. So I'm really excited about this concept, and it's from a book called The Gap and the Gain by Dr. Benjamin Hardy and Dan Sullivan. And these two got together and wrote this book. And it's actually Dan Sullivan's concept that Dr. Benjamin Hardy took and expanded on and really wrote a book about it. And it's the whole idea that we actually live in what we call the gap, which is, you have an ideal, we talk about it all the time, Holly, in your Be Gritty group, and that is imposter syndrome can basically be eliminated in maybe one form or another because of this gap gain principle.
Yeah.
Because we're always trying to measure up to an ideal, and we get this ideal that we are not where we should be. And so what happened is Dan Hardy has been a business coach for a long, long time. Dan Sullivan's been a business coach for a long, long time. And he had a group of people in a group coaching session one time, and they were all talking about this idea of how to measure success.
Yeah.
And one of the guys in there just couldn't understand what this guy was saying. He was like, I have this goal, this dream, this thing, and I'm sitting here and I am so frustrated because I can't reach my goal.
Yeah.
And Dan said, he goes, listen, he goes, you're measuring success wrong.
Yeah.
You're measuring it unto this ideal that you have in your head. And he goes, quite frankly, that ideal is so out of touch and so non-achievable. And the guy couldn't believe that this coach was telling him he took it as like, you're telling me I can't do this.
Right,
And
right.
he said, nobody can do what you're trying to do. He goes, you're measuring success trying in the gap, which means you can't figure out how to get to where you are where you want to be.
Yeah.
And he said, why don't you go backwards and measure the success you've had from the very start till now and measure success that way, because that's concrete and something you can see.
Absolutely.
And that's called the game.
I love that concept because I didn't even know it had a name. I talk about this all the time. Like you're climbing up the mountain and you sit down. I think in my last podcast, I talked about this of like going after your dreams and celebrating others. And you think that, you're just so far from it. And it's like, if you actually turned around and looked how far you came and how far, like 2 years ago, you probably were like, I wish I was where you're at now. Right. And you forget that like you've achieved so much success already, but because we haven't hit that ultimate goal yet, we feel either it's impossible or it's really hard or we're failures even. Like we think that way because we didn't hit this outcome and we get so hung up on that.
Yeah, it's so true. And then you think about how many times that outcome, I mean, I've done this my whole life. And what I would say, like, for instance, I had a podcast idea in 2020.
Yeah.
And I actually recorded 6 episodes and never put them out because I was measuring against this ideal of what it should be.
Yeah.
Instead of just going and doing it. So I lived in the gap for so long until last year or this year in April, we finally released the podcast.
Yeah.
Everybody goes through that. I lived in the gap for many, many years trying to figure out how I was going to do it. And most of the time, I would say for me, it's not perfect yet. And you've talked about that a lot in your group and your podcast. Yeah. If it's not going to be perfect. And the journey's never perfect. So, no. But I one of the things I have discussed with people that I work with a lot lately is that we live in the gap in so many areas of our life.
Yes.
I mean, with our families, our kids, our jobs, our careers, our businesses, and you catch yourself going back there all the time. And one of the biggest things that he says to do not do in the book is you can actually be caught in the gap by thinking you shouldn't be in the gap.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So it can kind of turn on you, and you can, because you're just, it's kind of our nature. We're going to go into that gap, and it's really, the key is how do you catch it? Yeah.
I mean, that's such a amazing process of seeing, first off, like, am I in the gap? And then if you start to do that thinking of I shouldn't be here, I should be there, just that can keep you trapped in the gap because you're just so kind of going around the mountain like, well, I just wish I was there. I wish I was doing this. And it's so easy. I mean, yesterday from when we're recording this, so Sunday, there was California International Marathon, the last marathon to make the trials, and I cried in the morning because I was like, I should be there. And I'm in this gap right now, right? Just from my health and all this other stuff. And then I had to remember I was able to actually go back to this place of gratitude because I looked around and I looked at my kids this weekend because I've been kind of struggling all weekend just with, oh my gosh, I wish I was there, even just to watch. I wish I was there. Right. Sure. And so my sports psychologist was like, hey, Holly, go back to a place of gratitude. And I just started to think kids grow up so fast and we always wish we had one more day with them when they're little, I was and I've heard that from people that have grown kids. So I was like, I actually was supposed to be gone for 5 days. So what kind of memories can I make in these 5 days with my kids that if in 20 years from now, wish I could go back and do and get get 5 more days with my little boys, And so I was we went to the Christmas market. We were making fudge today. We did all these things and it actually turned my whole thought process upside down to being really grateful. I got 5 more days with my little boys that I'd never get back, you know, instead of wishing I was somewhere else and doing something else and trying to achieve this dream, and it really did help take me out of that place of living in the gap and wishing I was somewhere else.
Yeah, it does. One of the things that we do, and we've adopted, my wife and I, Diane, and, she's got her own business too. So
Yeah.
she's probably much better than me about not living in the gap. I have been that, and most visionaries are gap thinkers.
Yeah.
Because, they're always thinking about where they can be.
Yeah.
And instead of where they are,
Yeah.
which is huge. So at the end of each day, and you've touched on a little bit of this too, especially on your Monday morning planning or your Monday planning on Friday.
Yeah.
We do this every night, and that is that we write down 3 wins from the day.
Yep.
And then we write down in the evening, after you write down the 3 wins, you write down the expected wins tomorrow.
Yeah, that's really good.
And then in the morning, you wake up and you look at those wins for the day. And I would tell you that I'm probably 30 to 40% on getting the win.
Yeah.
But then it doesn't really matter because you have to find 3 wins no matter what.
Yeah.
And what
I like
it does
that.
is it gets you back into the gain thinking of, hey, today was not worthless. Where entrepreneurs and quite frankly, a lot of athletes get caught up is in that. They don't see the gains. And if you don't have a coach or you don't have somebody that's pointing them out to you, you don't see it.
Yeah, you get stuck in that, especially like as runners, right? We go out there and grind day after day. And I had heard, I'm pretty sure, who was it that said it? I'm losing her name. I can see her face right now. She's an Olympian. She actually ran for Greece, but she lives here in America. All of you are probably yelling it out on the podcast, but she said like 33% of your workouts are going to suck. You're not going to do well. Like they're just going to be a grind. You're not hitting your paces. 33% are going to be like, okay, like they're good. Like whatever, kind of your general run of the mill day. And then 33% you're knocking them out of the park. Right. And ever since I heard her say that, a couple of years ago, I think it was in her book, and I Alexis Pappas, that's what her name is. Just remembered her. But she said that, and ever since then, I started to change my mindset. Like when I'd go for a run and it would be bad, instead of being like, oh, I'm not making any progress, or oh, this was a horrible day, I started to go, oh, this is just one of those 33% days, like the bad days. And then if it was just like a knock it out of the park day, I'm like, I'm not basing my entire confidence on this one workout. This is just part of the 33% good. So it kept me from going super extreme either way, which I have a tendency to do. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs and endurance athletes can be extreme, right? But it helped me come back to this place of, oh, this is just part of the process. And I think that's a piece as entrepreneurs that we get so focused, and athletes, we get so focused on the outcome that we forget that journey, and to actually not just get through the journey, but sit in the journey and appreciate the journey and find wins within the journey, because we're not very good at doing that.
No, we tend to, especially if you're somebody who's constantly living in the future. And let's face it, it's so hard to do. We're told, and I am part of you have to have a goal. There's no doubt about it. You have to have a goal.
Sure.
The problem is that when you when you're so fixated on it that you don't live today, then the best entrepreneurs I've ever seen and some of the best runners, my gentleman I love to pieces, his name is John Trent. And John Trent he's run Western States 10 times.
Wow.
And so he understands, after all of his training and all of his years, he understands how to live in the moment, but have a goal. And that is so tough sometimes, because what we do in your entrepreneurship and running your own business, you can have the best set plans on the planet. And we all know that tomorrow something goofy can happen, like COVID, or in running, it can be an injury. I had a little foot thing. I was on running. I was on a training track and had a little foot thing, was off for a week. Yeah. So, I don't run my next race until summer.
Right.
But I could totally live in the gap And from 9 months from now, or whatever it is, 7 months from now, you totally destroy weeks, if not months of training and whatever,
Yeah.
because you have a minor setback now. So
Right.
yeah,
Yeah, it's
really
a
cool.
huge thing that we all deal with as athletic entrepreneurs and athletes, and we get these setbacks and it can destroy us mentally. And especially if you get a few in a row, right? And you're just
Yep.
like, "Oh my gosh." Like, I mean, I've been training so long for a big goal, but what I've learned over the last couple of years is like I haven't achieved it yet. I missed it both times, and I've just had setback after setback over the last couple of years, but it's like I wouldn't change anything right now. Like even though it's been painful and hard and all the things, it's what I'm learning along the way is so powerful and so crucial into actually getting me to accomplish the goal.
Yeah,
Right.
it's so
And I
true.
think that if we discount the journey or we just kind of self-sabotage so we stay in the gap and never get out of that, and we go, well, this is just my life now and I'll never make it, and then either one of those, if we focus too much on the outcome or we sit here and kind of spew in that area, it shuts us down, right? Because if you have a goal that's too hard, it's going to shut you down, right? If you don't have
Yeah.
people that are championing you towards that, it's like this interesting dynamic of having a goal that pushes you and propels you forward without overwhelming you to the point that you don't think you can actually do it.
Right. Right. It's such a and it's one of the reasons why I believe we have to be coached. We have to have friends. We have to have
Yeah.
mentors. We have to have people. In my podcast, I interview people. That's what I do. I interview people's journeys, their
Yeah.
identity journeys. And one of the things that's been super fascinating on every single one of the podcasts, especially if it's an ultra runner or a runner or any kind of athlete, the one thing that they say over and over and over again that's common is that they all had a support system.
Yes.
They all had a support system because I can tell you that I go home and if I'm in the gap, if my wife, if I allow my wife, that's sometimes very
That's a big
difficult.
point, right? How do we allow people in to support us or not?
Do we, and that's super key because, she can go, hey, you're in the gap right now,
Yeah.
and go, oh man, I am, or just be honest and say, I'm living in this gap right now. I am actually not in any kind of frame of mind to be able to grow because I
Yeah.
keep looking at what I'm not. And it's really, really important to have the support system, no matter what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, like your ultra running example of the crew, right? Like you have to have the coach or the person that's providing your nutrition or someone who's detail oriented. There's all these different roles to play. And I think a lot of times as entrepreneurs, we're like, we can figure it out ourselves. We can
Right,
do it all. We can wear every hat. And a lot of times we are like a jack of all trades and a master of none, right?
right,
Because we are like, well, you had to learn it all as an entrepreneur when you first started out, but the problem becomes is when you go from the beginning phase to a growth phase, you have to start handing some of that stuff off. You have to start building a team. And I would encourage people, even if you are a solopreneur, like having a coach that can help call you out. Like I train a lot by myself. I have some friends that I run with here and there on easy days or whatever, but a lot of my hard days were done by myself when I was training a lot,
right.
right? But I still had a coach I checked in with before, after workouts, all those things, and if it was a tough workout and I explained things about like how hard it was, they were able to point things out. Okay, well, Holly, like you just ran a 100-mile week. Of course, this workout was going to be a tough one. Or, hey, like you just raced a half marathon 3 days ago. Like, just chill out. Like this one isn't going to supposed to be as good, or hey, you just got over being sick or whatever the thing. And I remember one of my coaches this year, after I had to drop out of a marathon, I was like so flustered by the whole thing. Like maybe the training didn't work because I tried a whole new training regimen, and I was like, maybe this, maybe that. And they were like, you need to calm down a little bit. I talked to my sports psychologist and she gave me this exercise to do of just like writing down every thought I had in my head, like pen and paper. There's just powerful things with pen and paper, right? And so I wrote down all the reasons why I thought I ran horribly and had to drop out. And there was this one sentence in there that I said, maybe I'm sicker than I know that I am. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe that actually affected me more than I know. And then like 2 days later, I wound up in the ER with pneumonia. And I'm like, well, that was the right one. Like, because like I came back to the paper 10 minutes later and I crossed out all the ones that didn't actually feel true. Like the training was bad or, whatever. And I circled that one. And I didn't know yet, like if that was actually true. But a couple days later, I couldn't even walk across the room. Like I found out how bad it was. And I was like, and it just brought this peace over me that like, I had people in my system to help point things out and go, Holly, we know you don't like excuses, but there are actual reasons why things happen too. And it's okay to accept that. Like, it's okay. Like, I can't make an excuse when it's the reality, right? Like, I couldn't run CIM this week because I haven't ran for 3 months because I've been sick. And it's easy to sit there on the day and go, I should have been able to train for the last 12 weeks and then go for a run and remember, oh, my heart rate's 180 at 10:30 pace. Like, no, I can't do that. Like, I actually can't do that, right? But it's hard to point that stuff out when we're so driven as entrepreneurs and athletes because we're like, no excuses. We should just be able to do this because so-and-so did it. But often we look at their end story and not their journey. And we compare our journey to their end story.
Yeah, that whole comparison is the thief of joy.
Yeah.
It's so huge. And and that's another thing they talk about in the book is that if you're comparing yourself, it's a super fast way to get in the gap.
Oh, and to stay there. And
so the trick is going, I'm comparing my worst to someone's best.
Yeah.
That's usually what's happening. And
all the time.
Especially in business.
Yes.
That's usually it. The other thing is, this guy, Dan Sullivan, he has been a coach for years. I think he's in his later years now. One of the things he decided he would do is, as a coach, he doesn't let anybody around him, and he's very, very strict on this, that's negative.
Yeah.
Because negative thinking, and we hear that's so trite, right? Don't be negative, be positive. But he says negative thinking will put you and keep you in the gap more than anything else.
100%. 100%.
And so, when we're trying to build a business and you're a negative person, and usually that negativity comes from obviously having something that you're aiming for that you're trying to get. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't get that ideal.
Yeah.
It just means that most of the time in our minds, the ideal is so, it's so out there at times that it's so hard to believe after a while, especially if you haven't achieved it, right?
Yeah.
So, and you look back at training and doing things athletically, one of the things that I see a lot of is, and I see it in myself more than anything, is I really don't see I'm famous for like you said, going out for a run or training for something and then wondering why something didn't go the way I had planned it.
Yeah.
And then going into the gap big time and thinking there's no way I could run 100 miles.
Right.
I can't even do a 10 miler and without this hurting or without that being a problem. And so, I remember I ran a race back in 2016. I ran a 50 miler and I was, half, 2/3 through the race. My IT band blew out.
Oh, that's the worst.
It's the worst. There's no pain like the IT band pain.
Yeah.
So, and my goal was to finish that race under a certain time frame. Obviously, we wanted to finish in around 12 hours.
Yeah.
And for me, that would have been very good at that time. But because I blew my IT band out, I had to switch midstream into what I was doing, which basically meant I could only run for like 20 yards and then I had to walk for 20 yards and then run for 20 yards. And I did that for 20 miles.
Wow.
And at the end of it, I looked back and I did it in 14 hours instead of 12.
Yeah.
But I had to adjust everything in the middle of the race.
Yeah. Which happens.
Right. I had to adjust my expectations. I had to adjust everything. it wasn't going to be, now it was like, we got to get in before dark.
Yeah.
And now we can't stop. We got to keep going.
Yeah.
And so that's when and what I will tell you, what running has taught me, what ultra running has taught me, is it's much like what travel teaches you, is that in the middle of everything that's going on, you have to change what your ideal is to what you can actually do. And when you're honest with yourself of what you actually need to do, that's when people really they spin out and really have a hard time.
Well, and you know what's interesting about this whole concept is that a lot of people give up instead of adjusting and adapting, right? Mm-hmm. This is why there's a lot of DNFs and marathons, and there's a lot of, and not that that's bad necessarily, right? Like, it was smart for me to DNF when I had pneumonia and didn't know it, right? Like, it probably would have not been good to run the other 13.1 miles, right? But it happens a lot when we're not hitting our goal because we go, well, I'll save it for another day. And sometimes that's the right choice. But I remember talking to a lot of my teammates this year, and they were like, we went out so hard to get that 2:36:59 that we ended up blowing up what could have been a really good PR if we just would have chilled out a little bit, and like we would have got closer to that. But the pressure sometimes that either is put on us from varying circumstances or, the goals out there, or the pressure we put on ourselves, if we are so tied to that ideal moment or that ideal goal that we can't adjust, we can actually miss out on a lot of things that we get in the process of just finishing something, right? And I think finishing things actually helps you get towards your goal more often than not, because if we stay in the gap because we don't finish something and we do that over and over, we create a pattern actually in our brain, right? These neural pathways that are like, oh, when it gets hard, we drop. When it gets hard, we just pivot and do something else. When it gets hard, this business idea didn't seem to work out, I'm going to try a different one, right? Before we actually give it time to marinate and be consistent and see what happens, oftentimes we just switch ideas or drop out or do these things instead of seeing it through and finishing. And there's something powerful that happens when you finish. I talked to one of my teammates yesterday who didn't make the trials, and she was like, I finished the dang thing. And I'm like, yeah, you did. And there's something about that. When I finished CIM in 2018 with 8 bathroom stops, and my roommate was like, you are gritty, I can't believe, like, everyone else would have dropped at that point, like having that many stomach issues. And I'm like, but there was something so powerful about finishing. And I think as entrepreneurs, we go with that idea of fail fast and move on. And while that's a good concept and has its place, I think that we have done that so much that we actually don't give time for what we are doing and the work we are putting in to actually produce results, even because it's not our ideal result.
That's right. It's so true. And last year, I'm working with a company right now in operations, growing a company. It's a startup.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to me how I have a visionary, the owner of my partner, he's a visionary to the nth degree.
Yeah.
And of course he comes out and sets this massive goal for us.
Yeah.
And we were so far from the goal last year in 2022.
Yeah.
And I was big time living in the gap.
Yeah.
Going, I don't know if we're going to be able to do this or whatever. Well, and so it was really interesting. I set up, I took my mind, I said, I'm not going to think about it anymore. We're just going to play out the rest of the year and we're going to keep going. And we came probably, I'd say half the way through the year, we were less than halfway to our goal. And in the last month of the year, because we decided what you just said, we're just going to finish. We're just going to put our heads down and we're not going to think about what the end is going to be. We actually missed our goal by like a percentage point, a couple of percentage points.
Wow.
And it was literally like we almost did like $1 million in December last year.
Wow.
And because we stopped going, and actually it was probably me more than anything, because operations people are always in the weeds.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
We're always trying to figure out how to get something done. And the visionary, sometimes we give the visionary a bad rap at times, but sometimes when everything is going to, in a handbasket,
Yeah.
if you would just trust the visionary's goal, because the visionary sometimes knows a little bit more. He's not so stuck in the forest, he can't see the trees. And
Yeah.
so it's been like that in this. And so we've had another incredible year, but we're falling short right now, but I guarantee you we're going to be close. It's just crazy. You
Yeah.
got to stay out of the gap. You can't be in the gap and grow something.
Yeah.
If you do, you're gonna risk your happiness. And the whole idea for us to be in business, the entire idea is to enjoy it.
Yep. Yeah, that's
what I
why we
think.
became entrepreneurs, right?
That's right.
Like to take back control of our lives, to go after financial freedom or time freedom, all these different
Yeah.
things. And we can get stuck in the weeds as entrepreneurs. And I think that's the value of a coach, is to pull you out, to be that visionary when you've lost sight of the goal or you're not sure if you have the right goal, and to help you pivot when you need to, but also to propel you towards your big goal. Because I think what you pointed out earlier is the flip side of going, here's the value of having a big goal, is that even if you don't hit it, like it's that whole concept of shoot for the moon and at least you'll land among the stars, right? Because if we don't have a big goal that propels us forward, or if we let that big goal shut us down, like those are the things that keep you in the gap, like I said earlier. But if you have that big goal and you do what you did and pivot your mindset versus the goal,
That's
and
right.
just go, we're just going to finish this thing and see what happens, you might get way closer than you thought you were going to get. And the visionary might be going, great, I threw that out there, but I wasn't even sure we would hit it. But man, we got a lot closer than even I thought we would. And I think that's part of the benefit of having that big goal, but you have to have the right mindset about that goal in order to keep you from being in the gap.
Yeah. And I think the thing that probably, it comes down to this in the end for me, is communication.
Yeah.
If we communicate about it, it makes it's like there wasn't a week that went by last year and this year that we didn't discuss the goal, talk about it.
Yeah.
If not just to look at it.
Right.
And then measure. So we're constantly measuring. We don't ever leave anything up to not being measured.
Right.
So you know exactly where you are, and you think about it, and sport to do the same thing. You're constantly measuring where you're at what time, and and in ultras, for any distance, so for the shorter races, obviously it's a shorter period of time, but once you get out to marathons and beyond, the time that you're in that goal and you're in that training is much different.
Yeah.
And you can lose sight of where you're going awfully quick the longer that time frame is. So it is great to have that support system, have people around you.
And creating milestones within that, which I've talked about in podcasts before, but just having those milestones, like if you're doing a marathon, go run a 10 miler or a half marathon and see where you're at throughout your training, right? We do that. So why wouldn't we do that as entrepreneurs? Like have these check marks along the way. It's so important to take that big goal and reverse engineer and go, okay, where are the milestones? Where do I need to be? Because that can help you get out of the gap. If you're like, the big goal feels so out of reach, but I have this little milestone that I just need to get to. And it's these baby steps. Like when you're going through a dark tunnel and all you have is a little flashlight, you're probably not seeing the end of the tunnel, but you can see a couple steps ahead of you, and you just got to focus on that. And we forget that as entrepreneurs. We're good at that as athletes. Typically we'll go, okay, I'll run this race or I'll do this and this will be my checkpoint. But we need to do the same thing as entrepreneurs and set up those milestones to keep us moving forward.
Yeah, so true. And for so many years, I think what kept me in the gap was that I had a goal of financial freedom.
Yeah.
And I did some crazy things. I did things I normally wouldn't do because I was in the gap.
Yeah.
So you'll take chances you normally wouldn't take.
Yeah.
Because you need to take calculated risks, but when you're in the gap all the time and you have gap thinking, you tend to cut corners.
Right.
You tend to do things you wouldn't normally do. And so that is another, huge part of that whole lesson. And I think like I said before, understanding when you're in the gap to get out of it, when you measure backwards, you said something a little bit ago that reminded me of dopamine.
Yeah.
It's about the dopamine hit. It really is. When you measure backwards, you get a dopamine hit. And when you see where you were and where you are now and how much you've progressed in anything that you've done, it really is amazing to get that feedback, because it really is about feedback.
Yes.
If you never get any feedback on where you're at, you're always going to be wondering.
Yep. And you need that. And the Milestones help with that. Coaches help with that. Communities, support systems help with that. It reminds you of the places you've been and where you're at. And it does. It gives you dopamine hit. It gives you that energy to keep going. Because the thing that kills the energy to keep going more than anything is to feel stuck. Right. And feel like you're making no progress. But if you can look back and find those moments or go, oh, I'm really close to this next milestone, let's just keep going. And you've created these breadcrumbs for yourself, and coaches help you do that, create those breadcrumbs for you, that it really does help. I mean, it just makes such a huge difference.
Oh, it's huge. Yeah. Big time.
So is there anything else you want to add around this before we end today? I think this has been such a great conversation. I think it's going to give our entrepreneurs a lot to think about. But is there anything else you want to add?
No, I think we covered it pretty good.
Yeah, we did. We did a good deep dive into it. Lots of good comparisons between running and the business world. Again, I mean, you guys, this stuff is so parallel. It's ridiculous. Like what we learn in one field can help us in the other, and vice versa.
So good.
Well, Ken, why don't you tell everyone again where they can kind of connect with you, listen to your podcast, let them know where to find you.
Okay. Yeah. You can find me at endurancelead.com. Endurancelead.com.
Perfect.
And I have a podcast that's on all the major podcast outlets called Who Do You Think You Are?
Yes.
And then, I coach, but I'm right now focused on this podcast, and it's really been fun.
Love it. Love it. And I was on his podcast. You can go listen to my episode. It was really fun. If you want to know a lot more about my background, I go very deep into all of that. So life open out for everybody to see, but it was super, super fun. Thanks for coming on the podcast. This was great.
Thank you, Holly. It's been a pleasure and an honor.
Awesome. We'll chat soon. Thank you for listening to the Be Gritty podcast, where sports psychology meets business strategy for entrepreneurs. If you enjoyed today's episode, leave a review and share it with other entrepreneurs. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on our weekly episodes. And dare to be gritty.